Love between humans is just not easy. And without great examples or education about emotions, communication, sex, and what keeps love alive, it's too easy to be disheartened, settle, or give up on what you want most. I believe you can have the love and intimacy you want. And having coached thousands of people on their love lives for over 20 years, I know what love can be for you. So I'm bringing you people who share vulnerably about their dating and relationship struggles and how they learn to create the most connected, fulfilling, and exciting love and sex of their lives, so you can have it too. If you haven't yet taken the quiz to see what keeps you from having the best love and sex of your life, go to shanajamescoaching.com/quiz. You'll get a personalized report of your strengths and challenges in the 5 crucial areas that lead to your most fulfilling and exciting love and sex life. Go to shanajamescoaching.com/quiz to find out. Hello, and welcome to this episode of Practicing Love. I'm your host, Shana James, and I'm excited today to have a conversation about love and deepening love and some of the underlying pieces that most of us don't talk about and the world doesn't lay out for us or teach us. And, mostly I think we're going to dive into the topic of awareness, but we also will, see where this goes into shadow and the idea of oneness or the experience of oneness, and really how you can deepen your relationship and what I call having a sacred relationship, one where you feel known and loved and understood and supported, and where, it's ever evolving and growing. So I have an amazing guest here today, Renée Blodgett. Renee, thank you so much for being here.
I'm excited to be on your show, Shana. It'll be interesting to see where today takes us.
I think so too. Renee is a modern mystic, a spiritual teacher, author of Magdalene's Journey. She's also a TED speaker coach. She had a PR firm at one point, and I can feel that the well runs deep. So give us a little bit of background of how did you start exploring awareness and oneness and the teachings that you work with?
That's a great question, Shana. I think the original journey that I went on many, many years ago started as probably many people's journeys away from organized religion. When you're going on a spiritual quest, it's kind of a delve into what else is out there beyond what we've been conditioned to believe, right? And so that quest kind of led me to so many different spiritual teachers, ironically starting with mostly male teachers, right? Yeah. When I'm on this quest of retreating from the patriarchs. So that was like Ken Wilber and Deepak and
I did a master's in integral psychology and Ken Wilber's teachings.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, he's amazing. And so all of those lineages, right, were super, super helpful. Yes. And then I started exploring more of the feminine through the work of goddesses, but also through academics like Karen King and Cynthia Bourgeois. I love her. Adyashanti and, so many of these sort of more modern mystics and teachers. And that kind of led me down a path of exploring both the modern mystic, the academia, and it's really the bridge where science and spirituality meet. Because, remember, I spent 30 years in tech. And so when you come from a technology world where you spend most of your time analyzing launch plans and strategies and ROI and comparative analysis, it's a very different orientation than coming from
talking to people who have straddled the worlds. It's just so amazing to have that technical background and the scientific background with the spirituality piece.
It becomes something so much more because you're looking through a broader lens. I think that's part of it. But it also was terrifying because, how could I go out into the world, at least my public persona on Facebook and other platforms, with this idea of love, this idea of the divine feminine, right? I was absolutely terrified that everyone would think I had become religious or crazy. Yes, either one of those two or all of the above. and really detach from reality as I've always understood it, right? And that led me down the path of quantum physics and philosophy and all of these disciplines as well, bringing in the best of all of these teachings from as far back as Plato to even the Upanishads, right? So I went deep in a lot of different directions.
Can I ask you how this has affected your love life, since we're talking about the topic of love?
Oh, I assume you mean romantic love life, opposed to love for
Good
another.
Distinction.
Well, I would say that in working with the Magdalene energy and the teachings, you mentioned this beautifully earlier. You talked about sacred relationship. And in our book, our first book, we're actually working on the second one, Magdalene's Journey, there's a whole section on sacred relationship and sacred sex. So in her teachings, which Anthony and I follow, it's very much about the union of the two. So until you can truly let your hair down and be vulnerable with the other, Magdalene talks about that a lot. This vulnerability allows the other person to have permission to open up and be vulnerable too. And I think when we're holding on and we're not letting that vulnerability go, there's no room for surrender. Really. I mean, when we're vulnerable, we have to surrender into. And that means showing our perceived flaws and all of these things and saying, I need to be held, or I need this right now, not from a clinging or a longing, but a needing from a support me in this moment.
Will you actually help or be here with me? Was it a big transition for you coming from the science world to start to be more vulnerable and open in these ways?
Yes and no. I think I've always been that heart space dreamer, the true romantic. I've always really had that long before my spiritual quest. So I wouldn't say it was harder. I would say that to turn on more of my feminine was harder. When you spend a lifetime in the world of tech that's predominantly men, especially CEOs and entrepreneurs of tech startups, you learn the masculine game. And I think I don't want to say I mastered it, but I would say that I became what I needed to be to navigate that landscape with ease and to get clients and to sit in boardrooms where it was all men, right? Especially in places like Japan, where I might be the only woman in the room. And so I think I learned to adapt to that, not becoming masculine, but exuding those qualities as my leadership role and the qualities of what I thought leadership to be. And so the biggest transition, I would say, in moving pretty much close to full time in the spiritual and consciousness realm is that surrender is what it's all about. Even in your masculine traits, right? If we talk about more traditional teachings about this, like the David Dedas of the world and Tony Robbins, where they sort of teach about polarity. And by the way, it is powerful when polarity's turned on. The energies within us shift, and I've seen it on stage in front of thousands of people. And it was mind-blowing.
Magnificent. And I have an interesting relationship with David Data too, where I've just seen how much pain can happen when people try to take on this new way of being, even though it's supposed to be this natural way of being. And yet sometimes it's this mask or this, inauthenticity that someone puts on. So I'm really curious to hear about it from this deeper perspective.
Yeah. And I agree with you about that, by the way. That was one of initially when I read that work way back in the day, right? This was the time I was doing a lot of the Tony Robbins stuff, who was echoing a lot of those teachings. It kind of made sense. I thought, I saw a couple stand on stage. This was the most profound one. I mean, I saw so many examples of this, but they had been married for maybe 20 years. And so Tony Robbins was whispering in her ear how to shift her presence, shift her energy, shift the way she stood, shift the way she breathed, shift the way she spoke to her husband, little tiny, tiny subtle nuances, right? It was almost like a Reiki session, like unraveling before us, and you could see it in real time, how he was shifting to balance her energy. It was so freaking profound. The softening that came over her and the masculinity as a way to kind of hold space in him. And it was instantaneous. So, my first thought as a psychology and anthropology minor was, wow, people could really manipulate this in ways that are self-serving as well. I mean, I shouldn't have gone to that place first, but part of the overanalysis brain of mine did. And I saw that happen too. And I think that, speaking to your point of how when it's an unhealed part of us and we don't deeply do the work and we just do that spiritual bypass, it doesn't become real and authentic.
Right.
Yeah, that's
right.
exactly
it becomes a facade. And it's like, and actually I remember in my marriage, after my marriage was over and we were doing a lot of that David Data work and other, orgasmic teachings and things like that, we lived in the Bay Area. There was a point after where he said something like, well, I was doing it because that was what it seemed like you wanted, or I was doing it because that's what it seemed like, a real powerful man would do. And it was so heartbreaking.
Yeah. I wrote a blog post about this on Substack that's going to go live tomorrow, I guess, on the 28th. And it talks, I don't want to get into politics because this is a far cry from what we're talking about, but it was just kind of talking in general about leadership and related to leadership, what makes a society feel safe, right? Feel cared for, feel safe, feel embraced. And the same parallel can be applied to relationships, because when we feel safe, it's like, I care for you. That's strength. It's not a masculine weakness. And I think that's, back to Yeshua's original teachings, and certainly Mary Magdalene's as well, is this surrendering into, which really echoes Eastern mystical wisdom across time, right? That when we surrender into the heart space, then all things are possible, right? All things are possible. The awareness increases, and as our awareness increases, our ability to attune to each other, as Thomas Hubel calls it, we can go more deeply there. And so this is not a spiritual bypass, right? This is saying, I'm going to do the work even if it feels really painful.
Yeah. Okay. And surrender. I want to go back to surrender, because you said you can surrender, feminine, masculine. There are ways to surrender. And I think that's a buzzword where many people are like, oh no, thank you. I don't necessarily want to go there. So I'm curious about your take on that.
Well, it's funny. I wrote about this recently too, and I brought it up in 2 different articles, mainly because it had such a profound impact on me. And I can't remember what conference it was, but I was at a conference and the words came up on the screen, not attributed to anybody. And later when I Googled them, there really is no attribution. And what's ironic is they think it might have been the words of Yeshua, but who knows, right? 2,000 years ago. But the words are, the world surrenders to a quiet mind. And so when I first saw that on the screen, I started bawling. Wow. In this auditorium, whatever, 300 people. Didn't really know too many people, but still, you don't really want to be breaking down bawling with people.
Cried. I think I've cried in every public place you could imagine. I'm definitely a crier myself.
Yeah, I was really surprised. Like, why did those words affect me so much? And I think it's because,
what did you find?
Well, I think especially in the world of tech and business, but in general, and when I say in general, I will steer it more to Western living, because as someone who has lived in 11 countries and been to over 95, I feel somewhat confident in my analysis that through experience, I have found this to be the case more in the West. And so that is this always on world that we relish in and embrace and applaud doing over being. And I was raised that way, right? I was raised by, my grandfather, who was born in 1915, and it was all about doing. The more that you could do, the more productive, what have you done today? Yeah. And so when that is honored and revered, and of course that extended through business, how productive can you be? I got results, but it was often the result of 14-hour days. And so I think that unraveling that and unlearning that doing as the go-to, right, or the necessary thing, that's going to lead to success, I think that unlearning is where we need to start.
Okay. So many questions I'm thinking of. So, all right, for someone who is listening and they're like, oh, right, doing versus being. Okay. I'm starting to get a sense of that, what doing is versus being. And I do a lot, right? How does someone, from your perspective, start to make that shift to really prioritize being? I know for myself, I'm a doer and a beer, but when I'm doing and I'm shifting into being, some of those survival fears come up. Like one came up today where I was like having all of these beautiful openings. And then I thought, oh my God, am I going to be able to function and make money and, create my life from here? So there are definitely some survival pieces to it as well.
Yeah. And I think that's the result of deeply seated conditioning as well. And we need to do, right? We need to be able to function from the place of getting tasks done, paying bills, and all of that. So that is sort of that masculine, really temple, or the masculine container, if you like, to carry and hold it all. So we need that in our lives, regardless of what sexual orientation we align with, right, in this lifetime. And so I think it's just taking a pause, taking a break, and going back to your breath, right? That's one good way to start, because when you go back to your breath, all that fear, if you notice when you're in a theta brainwave state, the fear dissolves, right? There's not this like focus on the future or on the past. When you're in the present moment, you're just focusing on the now. And when you're in the now, your mind isn't racing about what do I need to do and all of these things. So I think certainly breath work and meditation are really wonderful ways to kind of get into that present moment, which will increase your awareness. And I think, for Anthony, my partner, that's biggest for him. For me, as you could say, the divine feminine, although, we won't, they're really just energies. So this can certainly apply to anyone who's listening. Yeah. Going out in nature is my go-to. When I connect, we were talking before we started recording this morning about how this gigantic, eagle just kind of landed and stared at me for an hour through my window. And so for me, that just brings me into a heart-centered place automatically. It doesn't make any logical sense, but I believe that nature serves as a reminder through sacred geometry and other things, those natural laws of the universe, that we're interconnected, that there's no separation between us. No.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about how the difference I notice in my romantic relationship when I'm in a space of doing versus when I actually open and soften into my being, or just relax into my being, we could say. It's a completely different flavor of connection. There can be intellectual dialogue and it can be fascinating and interesting, and we can still have a connection. But when I don't relax out of my doing mode, it doesn't ever get to we could call it the sacredness, or even just those deep heart open places of feeling connected and understood and deeply understood, right? In a very intimate way.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And I think that connection time, we need to proactively create time for that sacred connection to happen. Sometimes when I get in my zone, right, and I can write for 15 hours at a time, I can just, I'll lose a sense of time. I'm like that when I'm in the dark room. I'm also a photographer. This is back in the day when I was doing dark room, right? I don't do that now. So the equivalent today would be fussing around in Photoshop. But, you're engrossed, right? You're kind of in this zone. And, sometimes Anthony will say, all right, I'm home and going to be making dinner. And we've had to really work on, do you want me to help you with dinner? Right. I mean, he's almost like a woman in that way. In some regards, I have to read his mind, and he's like, well, of course, what do you think? And so I really have to pay attention to those moments where he may not proactively come out, because even though we've had these conversations several times, he forgets, or, he kind of assumes, right? So I have to be the one to say, you know what? It's time to shut down. It's time to turn off. That's it. It's time to turn off. Even though it's so tempting to say, I have another 40 minutes of productivity time that I can get before dinner. That's not really helpful in serving a relationship.
No, but I feel you so much, right? That productivity time. It's like, if I'm working on something, I just want to get it done, or I want to get it to that next final or conclusion or whatever it is. And right, if we don't prioritize relationship time, intimate time, connection time, it's the thing that really tends for most people to fall by the wayside. And then the resentment grows, and the irritation grows, and the snipping, nagging at each other grows.
Yeah. And the other thing that comes up, and I find this interesting, for those who are spiritually minded out there, you're probably aware of the rise of the divine feminine. And we talk about it as creatrix energy. You actually see this in Eastern mysticism, in the Kabbalah, and other places as well. The creatrix, which is the feminine force, right? So think about the creatrix as the Sophia wisdom, the feminine face of God, that I spell Godde, right? Mm-hmm. That feminine face to the outside world. So when we're in our creatrix mode, and certainly men can be in that place also, it's like a tidal wave. And so I think communicating with your partner when you're going through that process is so helpful. We never used to do that. Anthony would come home, because I'm also an artist, right? I paint walls and furniture, and he would come home and there's flowers all over the house, right? Fake flowers that I'm going to create something with. And he's like, oh, this is so tornado-like. I just want to escape and go to the gym. He wants to go into his man cave. But I think when we can communicate, just as basic communication skills here, right? I'm going to go into my creatrix mode. It's going to be a tornado. I need 4 hours, and ignore me in this process, please, or we're going to get into a fight or whatever, or, things aren't going to go well. And the same holds true for when he might need his alone time or his cave time to say, you know what? I've just had a full day in therapy with children. I can't have this conversation right now. It's not you. It's not about you. It's about my need to go inward and contract. And so I think these kinds of conversations, openly, compassionately, without anger or tone in our voice, can be very, very healing.
Yeah. Yeah. And so important. I mean, that's a lot of what I write about in Honest Sex, is bringing that honesty, and in a mature kind of way, right? Not the kind of honesty that's like, screw you. This is what I need right now. And it doesn't matter what you need right now. It's like, hey, I love you. I care about you. And I have a need here. How can we, collaborate or co-create to have a win-win here for both of us, and really honor each other and want to uplift each other and forward each other's goals, while at the same time being honest about, hey, maybe there's a point at which it's like, okay, will you come back to me?
Yeah. Right. That fear, that hidden fear that we all have, right? Men and women both have that fear that we're not enough or we're not performing. There was another program that I did. This was a zillion years now. And the question presented to the audience, maybe 2,000 people in the audience from all walks of life. across cultures. And the question was, what is the number one thing, this was aimed at men, that is important to you in your relationship? And when it's not going right, you want to flee. And, there was translators in the room. And so again, it was across age, demographics, language. And the number one thing, what do you think it was?
I mean, I was going to say sex, but that feels too cliche. I would say
sex wasn't even in the top 3.
Really?
Yeah, really. The number one
thing. Being appreciated or being...
Well, in an indirect way, you're right. So, the more direct response was, I don't feel as if I'm making her happy, and it's too hard for me to figure out how to make her happy.
Yeah.
And one very alpha male looking, man who was a martial artist stood up and said, I just feel like I'm constantly failing. I just want to make her happy and I can't figure out, and that feels out of alignment. So I've always thought back to that moment because I was so astounded by the raise of hands in the room when that question came up. It shocked me because I didn't think that. I thought, oh, maybe it's lack of communication, sex, or money. Money is also kind of a big source of grief amongst couples. So, and that makes sense to me, right? When I think about my own relationships over the years, my ex-husband, and certainly the relationship I'm in now, which is pretty established and long-term, men want to make their women happy. And if we make it hard, it feels like they're flailing and failing.
My ex-husband actually said that to me. And, in some ways I felt like it was part of the world we were in, or the consciousness we were in, that we had heard about that teaching also around men really want to make women happy. But I could see it. I could see where he was in a way trying to make me happy. In a way, we were going about it in such different ways and we were not matched in certain ways. So it didn't work. But I could see that it was painful for him when he was trying to make me happy and then met with disappointment or resentment. And that's where I do think the communication skills are so important, to be able to come to each other and say, hey, I'm trying to make you happy and it doesn't seem like it's working. What's happening on your side? Can you help me understand you a little bit more? What is getting in the way? And to be able to have those honest conversations is really the foundation of understanding each other.
Yeah, I mean, this is a great segue into the underlying fear that most of us have, most of humanity has, right? Regardless of our sexual orientation, is that we're just not enough. Yeah. So when you feel like you can't fulfill the other, you feel like I'm not enough. Yeah. And, you might have been conditioned in that way, right? As a child, maybe you were not as enough as your brother or your sister. And so you always felt like you were striving. Or maybe you're an only child and you still felt that from your parents that you were not enough. And so I think it comes from, these years of conditioning and drilling that we need to be so much more. And that affects all of our behaviors. We call it trauma work today, or shadow work. We never had language for it, at least in my time growing up. We didn't have that language. We didn't talk about these things. And so I think we can name them, but I think we need to be careful when we name them in a way that creates a trigger in our nervous system. Because when our nervous system is on fight or flight, we can't relax into what needs to be healed.
Yeah, right. And that's a huge issue, is when couples are trying to navigate these things and they're in fight or flight as opposed to being in a relaxed nervous system. And there's so much conversation about that recently in attachment styles and all of the ways that we can regulate our nervous systems versus being in an unregulated nervous system.
Yeah, well said. And luckily, I think now there's open dialogue about it. So when someone hears that open dialogue, they can feel, I'm not alone.
Yeah,
I'm not alone. Somebody else is going through this too. And in fact, the majority of the world is going through it in different ways. I mean, we may not be a woman under the Taliban, or we may not have been a Holocaust survivor, but it doesn't mean that we don't hold collective trauma in our system, right? Epigenetics, right, really speaks to this, where we're keeping it in our field and in our energy field. And if we don't have that awareness, we assume it's ours to take on when it's really not ours at all. It's just a projection from the past. Well, I don't want to go down the quantum rabbit hole where, the teaching is that there is no past and there is no future. But, for simplicity purposes here, we can say from your past, right? Because Thomas Hubel does talk about this, but many collective trauma practitioners and therapists talk about this in similar ways, that trauma is always shared. It's never isolated. It's never individual trauma. It's always in relation to another. And so, we have whole societies, right? This is where, you go to a land where there was war and just horrific atrocities. People, depending on their sensitivities, can feel it in their body that something happened there. And so the same holds true when we're in engagement in relation to another. And so, you've probably done these if you lived in the Bay Area, where they were very popular, I guess, it started around 20 or so years ago, that gazing technique where you're gazing into each other's eyes and you're trying to be present and you're trying to connect in a oneness kind of way to the other. And they would do this. It didn't matter if it was, man with woman, woman with man, or woman with woman.
Human to human, soul to soul, actually, is what some of us called it back in then.
Soul to soul, heart communication. However, there were specific workshops that focused on couples. Yeah. And I think in some ways it's even harder for couples to do this practice. But that's very healing because it's bringing up stuff that we don't normally see. And when I first started to do this, I was like, why am I having such a hard time holding their gaze for so long?
It's really amazing. I mean, I used to lead authentic relating workshops, and we would have people do this kind of eye gazing. And sometimes I do this with my clients, where it's like, as we look at each other, I have people notice, what do you think I'm thinking about you? Or what, if anything, is getting in the way of you just being able to relax into the openness of this moment, right? And be actually curious about each other. And so much of what you said before around not being enough. And I remember when I first started doing it, I was like, what is my face doing? Do they think I'm doing this too much? Or do they think I'm doing that too much? I actually did a white tantra day where I sat and eye gazed for, I think it was 8 or 10 hours, but I actually love it. And I, in part, love when I guide couples through it and how uncomfortable they get, because then I know that there's so much room for, relaxation and intimacy and actually connecting that's available to them that they haven't really accessed yet.
Yeah, so true, actually. It's, as you said, as the observer for you in guiding these couples through it, you can be aware of what's been left out of the relationship. Yeah, that's really beautiful. Another, and I'm sure you've talked about this on your podcast, but breath work. And when you're breathing together, because we want our hearts to sync up. The whole idea of heart coherence is when there's no noise in the field. And so when we start breathing together, the same holds true in drum circles. When you start beating together, dancing together, chanting together, ancient Sanskrit chants, you start to become in rhythm with the other. Yep. And it's so powerful, so powerful. And from that place, all of your judgment, which is the number one thing I think that gets in the way, right, is judgment of the other or even judgment of yourself, it starts to dissolve into the background.
Yeah. I once heard a teacher say that he would never work with a couple until he did some guided practices to support them to, we could call it, relax into their higher state or be more in their soul than their personality. Or I've heard Terry Real talk about it's less important what's being said and more important who's there saying it, because are we in our child? Are we in our adult self? So it is really interesting. And I notice when I'm working with couples, the conversations we're having from that place of intellect or the doer or before we relax into these in sync places, there often is more tension and more conflict. And then, like you said, sometimes as we sink into these places, some parts of it just dissolve.
Well, they dissolve because we've expanded into, I would say, deeper consciousness and expanded awareness. And so when we're in that place of expansion, there's more space for new ideas to come in.
Yeah.
Right. We're so programmed in a way to respond to things. So if it
reacts to things.
Yeah, exactly. Well, right. That's really what I meant to say is react versus respond.
Right.
Because I think when we're in reaction, a trigger comes up and it reminds us subliminally of a conversation that we might have had with our mother that was challenging and difficult. And that's the story. Bruce Lipton calls it like you're on a record that's just spinning round and round and round. And no matter how much intellectual awareness you have about how much you want to change that broken record, it's never going to change because it's buried in your system, right? That needs to be purged, cleansed, or transmuted. And so that having that awareness and not making yourself wrong or the other person wrong, but realize that we are all mirrors to each other. And I think the observer in that quantum world, right? There's now scientists who are able to prove that through science to say that, yeah, the universe is in us as much as we are in it. And it sounds so grandiose, doesn't it? But it's really not. We're microcosms of the whole.
I think it's amazing. And I've had some of those experiences too of feeling the inner and outer. And this has been a delightful conversation. And I'm just very excited to know you and to get to know you more. And I love the way your heart, brain, soul combination works. Thank you so much for having this conversation. Is there any last thing you want to leave people with before you tell us how to find more of you?
Well, I think turn inward, that we are the gurus that we seek out there. That would be some parting words that I would leave people with, because I think a lot of times when we're racing and chasing, we forget to remember our innate wisdom that lies within. And that does involve slowing down, being aware of our breath, and knowing that, when things feel chaotic, especially now in the outside world, right, we need to turn inward where that innate truth, the universal truth, will emerge with clarity. And once that clarity surfaces, all the noise is just noise in the field. So, yes.
Thank you.
Go inward.
Thank you so much. And where can people find you?
Well, people can go to bluesoulearth.com, bluesoulmedia.com, which is my consulting practice and where I do a lot of work with TED Talk trainings and so forth. And then Study with Spirit is all of our courses and our membership, studywithspirit.com. And we are also on YouTube at Blue Soul Earth, where we have a podcast that bridges science and spirituality. So we've got a lot of really amazing, riveting interviews on there. And lastly, magdalenesjourney.com is our book. So you can go there, read about it. It really is about love is the glue that binds the universe together. And my partner, Anthony, and I are launching a wisdom school program this spring where we'll be bringing people deep inner wisdom across lineages to really expand the heart. It's not specifically targeted to couples, but wow, just how powerful would it be for a couple to do this together? And it's really all of those original Gnostic teachings that the kingdom lies within, and that love is your source of inspiration and your glue. So,
beautiful.
So yeah. Yay.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Shana.
I'm so glad you joined us for today's episode of Practicing Love. I hope you enjoyed our conversation and gained insight into yourself and your current and past relationships and inspiration for what's possible. If you like what you heard, I'd be so grateful for you to subscribe and write a quick review to help people find us. If you'd like more support in your love life, be sure to get your free copy of my best-selling book, Honest Sex, at shanajamescoaching.com/free. That's shanajamescoaching.com/free. And we'll see you next time.